Sophos celebró la cumbre de ciberseguridad sobre el uso de las últimas innovaciones en protección y prevención, para ir un paso delante de los piratas informáticos. El evento tuvo como objetivo ayudar a las personas a tener una comprensión más profunda de cómo los ataques se convierten en infracciones a gran escala, y cómo poder detenerlo. A continuación, veremos el evento por nuestro portal TV.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for Sophos Evolve 2020, our cybersecurity summit. I'm Carolyn Stern from Sophos, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Rob Maddalena. We have the honor of serving as your host for today's event.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks to each and every one of you for joining us today. We have got a brilliant show lined up for you over the next 2 days, and although it's all virtual, we want to make it as interactive as possible. So there's live Q&A, there's live polls, there's of course fabulous content, and we've got some prizes to give away as well.
Yes, and thank you everyone for already responding to our first poll about where you're located. I myself am here just outside of Boston, and Rob is joining us from Oxfordshire, England, the very definition of social distancing, I might add. But it's really fun to see how many people have joined us from so many amazing places around the world that, let's be honest, none of us can actually even currently go visit.
No, that is sad. I mean, we've taken the 2 meters to, I think, something like 3,200 miles. So we're doing it well. We're doing it properly. So wherever you're joining us from, we're really grateful that you've done so. And we recognise that you have a lot of choices for your virtual events. And we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly Sophos Evolve.
Actually, Rob, that reminds me, later today we're going to be letting you hear from Rachel Toback. She's one of our speakers, and she's going to talk to us about how you can be sure a hacker won't steal your airline miles, which she is literally paid to do. And I do promise, one day we're going to be able to fly again, so you'll need those miles. You don't want to miss the segment.
Definitely, and it is a superb session, it really is. So we've got hackers, live polls, and prizes, a veritable lions and tigers and bears. So let's have a look at the prizes. There they are. I get very excited when I see them. There's Apple Watches, there's the socks. Everybody loves the Sophos socks. The rucksack is superb, and that fleece keeps you nice and toasty. Now, the information on how to get the prizes is on the slide with you, but there is a legal, I do have to say something here. So at Sophos Evolve, we'll be giving away 6 Apple Watches over the course of the next few days at our EMEA and America events. By checking into the event today, you've automatically been entered into the free prize draw to win one of the Apple Watches. So without doing anything, just for showing up, you're in the draw for one of the watches. However, just like in-person events, we're going to give away Sophos swag throughout the 2 days. So get involved, ask a question, take a poll, share hashtag Sophos Evolve or tweet using that, and we'll enter you into a draw to win, for the opportunity to win, it's not guaranteed, one of the spot prizes. But before we get to all that, I want to introduce you to our first speaker of the day to formally welcome you to the event. Now, I'm not sure whether applauding on virtual events is the thing to do. I highly encourage it though, especially if you're sitting somewhere in public. Maybe you're on a bus. I think that would be quite funny. So our first speaker today is one of my favourite CEOs. He is the CEO of Sophos. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris Hagemann.
Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you join our Sophos Evolve series. Particularly during this difficult and unpredictable year of COVID-19, we appreciate you spending time with us. Our 2-day event features an incredible lineup of experts who will provide you with the cybersecurity intelligence you need to advance and evolve your organization's defenses and make them stronger. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 has affected many of us personally, and we extend our thoughts to any of you who have been sick or who have had colleagues, family members, or friends who have become ill. We wish all of you good health. Now, in addition to impacting our daily lives, COVID-19 has also impacted the lives and behavior of cybercriminals. Unfortunately, in an alarming way. Between news headlines and daily research from our own threat hunters and Sophos labs, we know cyber attackers are taking full advantage of the disruption associated with COVID, and they have never been more active or more aggressive. Now more than ever, cybersecurity must be a top priority for every organization of every size and type, everywhere in the world. It's that important. The pace at which the overall threat landscape is changing is at an all-time high. Sophos recently launched our innovative new rapid response service, in which we provide organizations with a 24/7 team of incident responders, threat hunters, and threat analysts to quickly stop advanced attacks while they are occurring and remove adversaries from their networks. Nearly 85% of the attacks our rapid response team have investigated have been, not surprisingly, ransomware. Our experts will share more about why offerings like rapid response are so critical. In the meantime, let's talk a bit about ransomware. Ransomware, of course, has been around for a while. It is one of the most successful cybercrime approaches ever invented for one simple reason. Time and time again, it works. Sadly, ransomware attacks are becoming more widespread, more sophisticated, and more aggressive. Here are some of the recent developments you should be aware of. First, rather than operating quietly in the background, attackers are now often stealing and exfiltrating sensitive data publicly to increase the pressure on organizations to pay ransoms. Second, it is now more common that ransom demands are moving up into multi-millions of dollars, particularly when attackers target larger businesses. Third, attackers are getting bolder. As Sophos reported in several articles, the Maze ransomware gang brazenly asked a target for $15 million in their ransom note, despite attempting and failing to encrypt any files. By the way, this particular incident has a good news outcome in that Sophos was able to stop the attack, but it could have been very different. Fourth, even though attackers have upped the ante with larger companies who have deeper pockets, this doesn't mean that smaller organizations are in any way safe. As our 2021 threat report covers, attackers are using ransomware against companies of all sizes, large and small. One particularly troubling and persistent type of ransomware is Dharma. In August, Sophos reported on how Dharma is one of the most profitable and prolific ransomware as a service families, due in part to its business model of selling ready-made kits to less sophisticated cybercriminals, and its average ransom demand of about $8,600, which is obviously scaled for small and mid-market organizations and what they can afford to pay. Fifth, and finally, as we all know, the cloud continues to drive modernization, innovation, and speed across every industry. But the cloud, like almost any technology, can be used for good or for ill. Cybercriminals are taking advantage of the cloud to advance their capabilities, and they are taking advantage of a more interconnected world and one where there is more digital information that is being shared faster and more broadly to launch attacks. Not surprisingly, again, ransomware is one of the most widely reported cybercrimes in the public cloud. In fact, according to our report, The State of Ransomware 2020, the most successful ransomware attacks included data in the public cloud. Cyber attacks are a very real threat to organizations of all sizes, and sadly, these attacks have the potential to create such severe disruption that they can jeopardize the ongoing health of organizations and even can put them out of business. Cybersecurity is now a board-level discussion at virtually every organization. A number of critical questions are being asked of organizations. Do they understand their overall risks to help prevent attacks in the first place? Are they sufficiently resilient with disaster recovery plans and related strategies in place? Have they developed a well-defined and well-tested response plan in advance if a security incident does happen? Have they trained and tested their teams and the outside resources they will partner with to ensure they can react as fast as possible? Because if an incident does occur, it essentially becomes a race between the good guys and the bad guys. If there is one thing you will learn during Sophos Evolve, it is that you need to invest in advanced, next-generation cybersecurity today to prepare for the future. All our speakers will shed light on the complex, fast-advancing threat landscape and explain how to apply this knowledge to evolve your own cybersecurity posture to ensure you are prepared. The threat landscape is incredibly broad and constantly changing, from social engineering to gain initial access to a network, to human attackers thinking and making decisions about what to disable next. And always keep in mind, attackers are the very definition of an active adversary. They are constantly and rapidly adapting and refining and targeting their techniques to be as effective as possible in any given situation. This is why we talk so much at Sophos about Cybersecurity Evolved. We invest a great deal of our R&D into artificial intelligence and machine learning, and in ensuring that the various layers of security we provide are synchronized together so they can share threat intelligence constantly and immediately respond to active attacks to help you stay ahead of the attackers. Sophos also knows that some cybercriminals pick their targets very carefully, planning their operations when IT managers are offline at night or on weekends. The need for 24/7 monitoring has never been more important. The Sophos Evolve experts will provide more insight into how around-the-clock security works and why it's so important, especially now during COVID-19. Attackers have adapted to our new style of remote and hybrid working, as our guest speaker, Karen Elazari, a security analyst, ethical hacker, and popular TED presenter, will explain. We're also excited to hear from our CTO, Joe Levy, and our Chief Information Security Officer, Ross McKercher. That's a lot of C-suite power, about why it's important to invest in cybersecurity solutions that are predictive and adaptive. They will also explain what's next in Zero Trust and the cybersecurity system we already have in development that is capable of responding, thinking, and improving on its own. At Sophos, we are leading the industry in delivering true next-generation cybersecurity solutions that are powerful and intuitive, that deliver world-class security, and at the same time are accessible to organizations of all sizes. I joined Sophos about 8 years ago. As we have pursued our vision, we have seen tremendous, consistent success in the market. We have grown our billings from roughly $350 million 8 years ago to over $900 million projected for this fiscal year. And we have more than tripled our customer base from about 150,000 customers to now more than 450,000. And we are just getting started. Our next generation portfolio, which represents our most advanced security offerings, all managed in a single integrated cloud console and all accessible via APIs, is growing at over 30% per year and now represents almost 70% of our business. There is not a stronger, more innovative, more comprehensive, more open next-gen platform anywhere in the market. For years now, Sophos has made a huge bet on MSPs, and they have become one of our single most strategic focus areas. We have grown our MSP business at over 50% per year now for 4 consecutive years, and it shows no signs of slowing down. In fact, it's accelerating. Today, we have over 100,000 MSP customers and over 12,000 MSP partners growing literally every single day. Our Managed Threat Response, or MTR offering, is just over a year old now. Fueled by the growing need for 24/7 awareness and response, MTR has attracted more than 1,400 customers, making us one of the largest and most respected managed response services in the entire industry. It's never been more important for organizations of every type and size to get cybersecurity right. And the potential costs of being exposed and of getting it wrong have never been higher. At Sophos, we could not be more excited about the lineup of offerings we have to help you. World-class solutions to protect and defend your endpoints and servers. Advanced next-gen firewalls to protect your networks. All managed natively in a single cloud console, all accessible through APIs, and all communicating actively together to share critical information. And now enhanced with 24/7 services like Managed Threat Response and Rapid Response. During these next 2 days, you'll have a chance to hear from a host of industry experts. I encourage you to learn all you can and ask any questions you have. We appreciate your time, and we're going to do our very best to make it productive. Thank you again for joining Sophos Evolved. We look forward to working with you to help you defend and protect your organization. Thank you, stay safe, and be well.
Many thanks for that, Chris. And seeing how the cyber crime industry has kind of matured now to the point of actually targeting different market segments kind of makes you realise how critical it is for all of us to do everything we can to try and stay ahead of that curve.
Yes, it's true. And while I appreciate sometimes when we listen to that, the threat data can feel a bit overwhelming, it is still really reassuring to hear about the power of technology as well as human expertise that is being brought to bear against these kinds of attacks.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I mean, we've built a whole agenda, unsurprisingly, around bringing you everything we can to help you to stay ahead of the curve. So let's take a look at the agenda now. So first up, we've got Jeff Pollard. He's the VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester. And Jeff heads up the team that does lots of research on CISOs. So there's no better qualified person to share with you the 6 different types of security leader. Following Jeff, we've got our very own CTO, Joe Levy, who has a similar barber to me. And Joe's going to share with you our cybersecurity strategy and how that's evolved. And Carolyn will be joined by some of our senior team to take your questions around that as well.
Yes, and after, as I mentioned earlier, we have Rachel Toback, who is a 3-time DEF CON award winner from the Hacking Conference. She's going to let us in on her secrets on just how easily and quickly she can access our private information using the information that we post publicly on social media in Hacking the Human. Andrew Mendel, who I cannot recommend highly enough, takes us behind the scenes of a simulated attack in Be the Hacker, Beat the Hacker. And finally, Doug Almuth will interview Jason Nurse, Associate Professor from the University of Kent, and our Sophos PR Director, Sarah Eberly, on what you might want to consider regarding an external communication plan, should the worst happen and and your company experience a breach. But remember, I know it's a great agenda. There's a lot of information there and a lot for you to take in, but we actually really want you to get involved. So don't forget that you have a chance to win some awesome Sophos swag and prizes simply for participating. That is how much we love hearing from you. So post a question in the Q&A and keep an eye out for the polls that will open through the course of today's presentations. And be sure to follow and share with us along with the hashtag Sophos Evolve.
Yeah, I'm actually logged in as a participant as well, so I'm entering everything I possibly can to see if I can get on that list. Who knows? I probably won't be allowed to. So if that wasn't enough content for you, we've got on-demand content and real people. If you go down to the Demo Labs button, that's the kind of virtual room where it all happens, and you can have your questions answered there and learn more about our technology and solutions. So pop along to that, but not just yet. So I'm excited. Are you excited? Hands up. Who's excited? I can't see any of your hands. So let's get things kicked off with Jeff Pollard. And he's going to explain to us how the role of the CISO has evolved in response to today's changing security landscape.
All right, thanks for that. And I am super excited to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. Today, I'm going to talk about one of our pieces of flagship research here at Forrester on the future of the CISO role, and in particular within that, the 6 CISO types that really define the current state and the future state of what CISOs are ultimately going to need to become as they think about their career, their companies, their progression, and ultimately sort of the entirety of their professional lives. And I know that seems like a lot, right? That's big, but it's going to make sense why. And here's really one of the most important parts when you think about the future of the CISO. The future of the CISO role is important for a bunch of reasons. One, society depends on computing and connectivity and applications and data, of course. Commerce depends on the same things. Our livelihoods, our professions, our families, our privacy, all these things are touched by security. Of course, that's absolutely true. But the future of the CISO role is also important because it is also your future as a CISO that you have to think about. It's not just this kind of intangible thing that sits out there that you have to worry about at some future date. No, it's a thing that touches on you right now. And it's a thing that in 5 years, you're going to feel the effects of and the results of if you're not thinking about it today and if you're not planning for it. Your companies are obviously planning for the future now, right? That's something businesses are doing all the time. You're probably doing it in your personal life. But you've also got to think about it from a professional perspective and think, what is my future as a CISO? What am I going to do to make myself better, to find the right opportunities, to land in the right spots, to ultimately maximize success? I saw something funny on the internet the other day. It was a thread on Twitter, and it said, what does CISO stand for? Wrong answers only. And I think one of my favorites was constantly ignored security officer, right? Which is sort of funny. But, you know, tongue in cheek and pithy and all that stuff, it's interesting, but that's also how a lot of us feel, right? When we operate in this role, it's how a lot of the end users that I talk to feel when I talk to them in my research and as I'm writing and as I talk to them in inquiry. And some of that is because one of the ingredients that CISOs haven't had prior to now is the concept of intent. See, when you think about the history of this role, it's sort of interesting. It kind of grew out of the mid-90s when someone plugged in a printer the right way, or when someone maybe configured a firewall. They weren't necessarily selected to work in security. It wasn't a calling. It wasn't necessarily a career path. What happened with most of us is that we kind of accidented our way in to cybersecurity. We were the only person that, you know, knew to configure the firewall or happened to look it up or whatever, right? This was before we could search for it easily, and we just sort of had to make things happen. And that's fine. That's what got us here. That's how a lot of us found this industry. But it's not going to be sufficient moving forward. We already know that there's a skill shortage. We know that there's a staffing shortage, and some of that is certainly self-inflicted because a lot of the senior most people in this industry found it. We were autodidacts. We learned ourselves. We gravitated to it, and it wasn't intentional. We just sort of found our way there. But that isn't going to suffice moving forward. And it's not going to suffice in terms of your future as a security leader or the people that you supervise, their futures as eventual security leaders. Instead, it's going to be about intent. It's going to be about having a plan, having a career path, having a dedicated set of capabilities and focus and initiatives that get you from where you are today to ultimately where you want to go in the future, right? It's a little bit of that book title, How to Get From Where You Are to Where You Want to Go. What got you here won't necessarily get you there, but that's okay because there is a plan to be successful in the future. And it's fairly straightforward, at least in terms of the things to think about. So the future CISO is all about intent versus accident. It is about actively cultivating those skills. It's about avoiding the mistakes of the past, and it's about a meaningful contribution at the C level. Voluntold is a concept that I wasn't familiar with early in my career, but learned about it eventually. And I think that's true for most of us, right? Volunteering is mandatory sometimes. There are certainly some security leaders out there that got voluntold, or when, the initiatives were up for grabs, they stayed still and everyone else kind of stepped back, and suddenly it became their responsibility. So that's what we're trying to move away from, because when that happens, that's where it becomes more difficult to make that meaningful contribution at the C level. Right? That's where it becomes a real challenge to actively engage and operate with a mission, right? With a clear path forward. That's why we're going to stop necessarily being voluntold, and we're going to think about operating with intent. But there's something else that's incredibly important for CISOs to do moving forward outside of intent. Because the next thing is starting to say no and starting to understand what they shouldn't be doing. And that's about constraints, right? Because for too long, security leaders have spent all of their time and energy and effort trying to do everything for everyone, and they lost their focus because of it. I talk to security leaders every day that are partially responsible for privacy, partially responsible for product security, partially responsible for GRC and compliance, partially responsible for audit, of course, fully responsible for cybersecurity, probably interacting and engaging on third-party risk, most likely involved in physical security to some extent, at least potentially monitoring some of those technologies. By the way, they're responding to incidents, and oh my goodness, right? We've all got to take a breath and kind of calm down, because constraints are not a bad thing. Constraints lead to focus, and focus can lead to innovation. So if we find a way to create some of that space that we need as security leaders, then we can also put ourselves in a position to start to innovate, to start to focus better, to start to say no and not try to be everything to everyone. I've got a stat for you. 0% of us are good at everything. That's just a fact. It's not arguable. So if your security program is doing 40 things, they're not doing 40 things well. If it's doing 20 things, it's probably better than the one that's doing 40 things. So start to think about those constraints and how you can narrow the aperture of responsibilities, how you can focus more on what you should be doing rather than what you've had to say yes to. And it's not an easy transition by any stretch. It's going to take some time. But it's important, because here's another fact about security leaders that's going to shock you a little bit, or maybe not, but it's certainly going to be surprising. And it's definitely going to give us a little bit of an autopsy of some of the problems related to being a security leader. 13%. 13% of CISOs are actual C-level titles. 87% or so are not. Now, that's based on research that we have coming out soon. It's our CISO career path study. We performed one in 2017, and we're updating it now in 2020. It's going to be released as an infographic. And within that, we look at what CISOs have identified with. We grab the data from the Fortune 500. We use sources like LinkedIn, biographies, speaking engagements where a bio has been posted, what the security leader itself has done, books, etc. And we look at the background and the current state and the title of CISOs. Where'd they go to college? How long in their career were they, et cetera? And only 13% sit at an SVP or EVP type of level, depending on their industry. The rest are VPs or directors, and they're generally proxied from being a defined and actual C-level title, often by the CIO. The majority of security leaders still report into the IT organization, and that's a problem. There are some conflicts of interest there whenever you do, but most CISOs, again, accidenting into it, being voluntold to become one, find themselves outside of being a real C-level. For publicly traded companies, they're not on the firm's 10K, right? They're not a company officer. They have spending authority. They can procure things. They have a budget, but they haven't reached the level of being an actual C-level title. And that has to change. By the way, of that 13%, the vast majority of those are on their second or third CISO job. So they've done it once, they did it again, And by the third time, they said, you know what? I'm not going to do that. You have to bring me in as an SVP. I've done this before and I know the shortcomings. I know the problems in not being a full C-level title at my organization. So that's kind of fascinating, right? To think about that once you've done it a few times, you suddenly get why being proxied away from the rest of the C-levels is a problem, why reporting to the CIO is a much bigger issue. But this is something to think about, and that's where that intent comes in, because you're going to evaluate opportunities based on this. And maybe you don't take a role that could otherwise be promising because you know that what you need in terms of access and organizational chart is not what you're going to get in that opportunity. So think about that as you consider options out there, and as you think about moving on, as you think about the next thing that's going to happen for you in your career, operate with that intent and say, I'm only going to take that role if it gives me access at the C-level the way I want it. But here's another fascinating one. One of my favorite myths out there, and it is a myth, by the way, is the 2-year tenure of CISOs. It's not true. It became a common topic. It became sort of part of our popular history, if you will, but that's not what the data shows. Across the Fortune 500 self-identified tenures, most CISOs have around a 4.2-year tenure. And guess what? Based on data we pulled from executive staffing firms and others, that maps to the standard tenure of other C-level roles, only eclipsed by the CEO, which generally has close to a 7-year tenure. So 4-year tenure for the CISO, CIO, CMO, CFO, et cetera. That's about where they should be. So you are not going in to a 2-year opportunity. You're going into a 4-year one. So that 3-year plan is going to be complete if you join with that in mind. So think about that. This isn't a 2-year journey anymore. And the concept of the CISO being sort of the chief scapegoat officer, if you will, right? Or the chiefly ignored scapegoat officer, which was another one. And I did like that one too, that I saw on that thread. That's not what's actually happening, right? CISOs certainly do get let go and certainly might get let go as a result of a breach, but it's not nearly as common as it used to be. There's no real benefit for that. In fact, some CISO compensation packages are now including what's kind of called a golden bullet. And that is basically that if you are let go as the result of a breach, then you effectively have a golden parachute. That's a clause that's now being negotiated in, again, for some of the more prominent CISOs out there. And for those that have been in a few different roles, that's ultimately how they start to negotiate things. So being scapegoated still happens, but it's not as common as it used to be. And the key here to think about is that this is not going to be a short-term opportunity. This is going to be something you're committed to for 48 plus months. And so you've got to think about what that means long-term in your career, because this is not a short stay. You're going to be there alongside colleagues for about the same amount of time. So with all of those inputs, knowing that 13% of CISOs are actual C-level executives or sit in that sort of organizational chart from a North American organizational chart perspective, knowing that this is going to be a 4-year stay, understanding that a lot of us found our way into this, it wasn't necessarily something that was intentional. How do we take a step back and think about how to get this right? And this is where our vision research came into play about our 6 CISO types. Now, there's going to be a lot of things that come up as I go through this content, and rest assured, we're going to address some of those things throughout the deck or in Q&A session as well. But one thing I do want to stress about how to get this right is that no one is a type and not any other type as I go through these, but everyone is a little bit more of one type than the other. And if you start to know your type, you start to know the kind of opportunities and activities that energize you, then you can start to think about your career that way and start to think about your opportunities that way. And you can begin to operate with that intent I mentioned before. So let's talk about the 6 types of CISOs that we see out there. We boiled this down into a few, and I'll give you a little bit of backstory of where this came from. Back when we actually were around people and we traveled, we had an offsite in 2019 when we started working on this research. And we were sitting in a conference room. It was myself, Janann Budge, Paul Mackay, Claire O'Malley. We all sort of write on our CISO team here at Forrester. And we were talking about CISOs and some of the problems they encounter. And I sort of had this moment where I said, you know, there's such thing as like a turnaround artist as a CEO, or sort of the corporate raider type of, you know, Michael Douglas in Wall Street, right? If that dates me a little bit in terms of my movie references. I said, you know, there's got to be something like that for CISOs, right? What if we thought about it that way? And then we began to brainstorm, and this is where we got. So I'm not going to walk through in detail each and every one of these, but I am going to give you a little bit of an overview. So you've got the transformational CISO. Those are the ones that are coming in and leading long-term change to the security program, often elevating a security program that might have been internally focused to one that's substantially more externally focused and aligned with the business. These are leaders that are excited by change, that are energized by navigating what is a very, very difficult journey to take a security program that's probably sufficient, but not, or probably necessary, but not sufficient for what the enterprise needs. So we're going to dig into that one quite a bit, because we're actually at a point in the pandemic where the transformational CISO sets of capabilities and skills are needed by every CISO, no matter where they are and who they are. Then you've got your post-breach CISO. These are the folks that come in after a mega breach. And they're effectively responsible for kind of reinvigorating and reforming security at the company after an adversary has done a significant amount of damage to that organization. By the way, each one of these on a spreadsheet that we didn't publish, that we don't show because we don't always have folks' permission to say what type they are, we have an archetype for each one of these. Someone that we profiled and interviewed as a part of the research, and this is one that's out there and done this a few times now. The tactical and operational expert. And by the way, sometimes tactical is a bit of a pejorative in the industry. It shouldn't be in this case. These are people that know how to run a security program well, right? They understand how to run technology and management and change, et cetera. But they like technology. They're focused on operations. That's what they want, a smooth, well-oiled machine. So it's not a downside to be that type. Sometimes that's what we get. None of these are better than the other. They're just different. So if you enjoy operational issues, getting stuff done, being very action-oriented and process-oriented, that's a great one to be. And by the way, companies need that type in situations. You've got your compliance guru. Your GRC folks often come from a background of audit or risk management, deep knowledge of compliance issues, often very, very vertical savvy. In fact, one of the compliance gurus that we find out there, often these are going to be the folks that stay within a similar industry. So they might move from a fintech to a financial or to a finserv and insurance, but they often stay in kind of the same vertical because they understand the compliance and regulatory environment of that. And they really make security part of a risk management conversation. Then you've got your steady state CISO, the people that are in an industry that doesn't need to transform, a company that doesn't need the security team to be entirely different than what it was the year before, someone that wants security to stay where it is now, not necessarily transform, but certainly not get any worse, and fulfill what it's doing for the organization today. These are some of my favorite security leaders because you have the most pragmatic and practical conversations with them about where things are going. They have a natural degree of skepticism, though that's probably true about the industry as a whole. But these folks are in the right situation and they're keeping things on an even keel. And then finally, one that's growing and one that you'll find in the security industry in particular, but also one that you'll find at technology companies and software companies, the customer-facing evangelist. The CISO role that's really charged with talking about the fact that security is a core capability of the product or service that that company takes to market. Often in B2B companies, not as much in B2C, though sometimes, but generally speaking in B2B companies where primarily what they're selling is business to business, there's a high third-party risk mandate and overhead. And so these CISOs have to be the face of cybersecurity for the company. They're making it front and center, leading webinars, having conversations, doing customer meetings, participating in advisory board sessions, et cetera. These are some of your highly visible security leaders out there that are doing that. So these are the 6 types. Now, again, everyone's going to have a little bit of one type or another. It's about thinking about these in terms of, do I get genuinely excited about leading a multi-year overhaul and redesign of a security program to be better aligned with the organization? Or do I prefer to run a security program that's relatively mature and really needs to stay where it is without taking steps back, but doesn't need to be reinvented or overhauled? Do I love interacting with customers and helping my company directly with revenue generation and making security part of that value proposition? Which of those gets you excited? Which of those makes you happiest, right? Which of those energizes you? That's what you want to think about as you think about these 6 types. Because once you've sort of identified the type of security leader that you are, which one of these 6 types you fall into, the next most important phase of this is finding CISO company fit. And we define that as the degree to which the CISO type at a company matches the type the company needs to maximize success for both parties. All right, so let's give some examples, some real life scenarios based on these types that exist. One of the security leaders I talked about, he was on his 4th or 5th security leader gig. He had just moved from being the security leader of an incredibly large multinational, which required him to do substantial international travel, required him to rebuild security at every single acquisition that company made, ultimately sort of required him to just do a lot of different things. And he was in his sort of late 50s, early 60s, didn't want to travel the globe anymore, had grandkids at this point, wanted to be home more often. He very much fit the type of that transformational security leader in terms of what he had done historically. But he took a deep breath and said, I think I want to be a steady state leader now. I'm done with the international travel. I don't want to do it as much. I don't want to rebuild security programs across every single acquisition my company makes. And his prior company had been highly acquisitive. So he sort of took a step back and found that steady state opportunity that he wanted, where he might have some US travel, but doesn't have as much. Again, some of this was pre-pandemic, of course. And so he really aligned himself with a role that better suited what he wanted to be based on the stage of his career that he was in. And that informed our research as we talked to him. But the pandemic has put a lot of pressure on us to think about the transformational CISO, because frankly, our companies have transformed, our business models have transformed. Everything that we're doing is now quite a bit different than it was before. And so you've got to think about that as you move forward. So some of the details of the transformational CISO out there, as you think about this role, they're heavily experienced in change management. They understand how to lead change and make things different, but they also understand how to communicate incredibly well. They are good at selling security from an organizational perspective. They know how to influence. They're energetic, they're dynamic, they're extroverted, they're outspoken. Right? They're good at that. Because right now, that's what a lot of companies need, right? They need energy from an organizational perspective, because it is hard right now. 2020 has not been a particularly fun year. And if you're in a role where failure is constant and often evident the way that it can be for security, you've got to take a big step back and figure out, as a security leader, how can I keep my team motivated and energized in light of what they are dealing with on a day in, day out basis? That is not easy. So we've all got to up our energy a little bit, right? We've all got to be quite a bit more energetic. And we've all got to have a different set of skills than maybe we've had in the past. And so when you think about it, it really is a scenario where every CISO is a transformational CISO now. You just can't get away from that. It doesn't mean that you're transforming the security program per se, but it does mean that you've got to find a way to connect with your security team and the other stakeholders in the enterprise in a much different way. Because like I said, it's been a hard year, right? 2020 sort of felt like it either lasted a year every day or the fastest year in history, kind of depending on how things have gone for you recently, where you are in the world and what's happening around you. And so let's take a deep breath of kind of positivity as we think about what the year's been and look forward. So that, much like my obligatory piece of art, this is sort of the obligatory future slide, right? This is us looking ahead to what comes next. But frankly, it's just nice to kind of look outside and imagine, hey, I might be able to go to one of those places again one day and travel there, and that'll be fun. So that's part of why I have this in here. But when you think about being a transformational CISO, it is about positivity. It is about energy. So here's what transformational CISOs need to have right now to motivate their teams, right? To bring forward. One, you've got to be able to thrive in chaos, and you've got to make your team comfortable with chaos, because that's what's getting thrown at them consistently day in, day out as a security practitioner anyway. But there's more chaos, there's more ambiguity and impact that we're dealing with. I get it. Security people and certainly CISOs prefer order. And the pandemic makes that tough, and work from home makes that even more difficult in some cases. But you've got to find a way to be very comfortable there. And you've got to let your team know that they should be comfortable there as well. Empathy matters. In fact, one of my former colleagues, Rick Holland, said this on Twitter, and I'm going to give him credit. Empathy is a superpower right now. Everyone processes what we're all going through in different ways at different times, and it's up and down. It's not a continuous feeling. It's not kind of a straight up improvement. It's cyclical. And so you've got to be empathetic. You've got to have empathy for your team. You've got to be authentic, and you've got to want to know how they're doing and how their day is and what's happening around them and how they're handling the fact that everyone might be home, or the kids were in school and now they're not in school and everyone's here. I was on a call yesterday where one of my colleagues' kids came up and started talking to him in the middle of the call, and he apologized. And I'm like, we're well into 2020. You don't apologize for that anymore, right? I mean, that happens. It is what it is. So you've got to be interested and authentic, and you've got to have empathy for your team and let them know that you care. Engage, listen, be present. Also say yes. It's fun. Saying yes is fun. Figure out how to say yes instead of saying no or no, but. And make sure your team understands that too, because that's what you've got to do now, given what your enterprise is dealing with, right? Back in March, we couldn't say no when we all decided people were going to work from home. You didn't have enough VPN licenses, you figured it out. You didn't have enough laptops, you bundled up computers and sent them home with people. Security teams were actively working alongside IT to provision VPNs and technology. You couldn't say no to that. Well, it worked. I mean, we should pat ourselves on the back. That was huge. We absolutely stepped out of what we did every day and made that happen. Be proud of that. Keep that going. Keep that spirit out there. Figure out how the company can operate. Don't say no. Don't go back to that model. Figure out ways to say yes, and make sure the team understands that, and stay focused on the outcomes, not the inputs. Take high output management, a classic from Andy Grove, where he talks about the fact that too often we measure inputs and we have intermediate goals that cloud our version and vision of success. Remain focused on the outcomes. Understand what the organization is trying to do and why, not just the obstacles along the way, not just the problems that are going to pop up between you and wherever you need to get. And keep your team focused on that as well. As you think about the people that report to you or the people that report to them, sit them down and make sure they understand what the developers are dealing with now. Because guess what? Those water cooler conversations, those passing each other in the hallways, those whiteboard sessions in conference rooms where you could talk a solution out and overcome some obstacle, if that's what your culture depended on before, it doesn't exist now. You don't have that. And a lot of cultures were dependent upon that to stay around, to actually get along with each other. And so there's a real chance here that security can go toxic very, very quickly if you don't keep that in mind. So keep everyone focused on the outcomes, not the work that it's going to take to get there, because that work is going to happen either way. Some companies are fighting for survival. Some are at the status quo, and others are experiencing a massive surge of customer demand and interest right now. And their security is having to evolve as a result of that, as the way their business changes and their part of the world is different. So keep that in mind as you move forward, right? Stay focused on the outcome, because change is inevitable, but it's also necessary. So let's talk about the kind of final chapter, because this isn't where things end. Because one of the mistakes that we can run into when we think about these types, in fact, it's the number one criticism of these types out there, and I'm going to share it with you because I love it, is what I call the Da Vinci Fallacy. And here's what it is. It's that everyone should be like Da Vinci. So they can paint, they can sculpt, they can design helicopters, they can figure out anatomy, they can do all that stuff, right? Except the reason why you know Da Vinci's name is because he can do that, right? Other people couldn't. Michael Jordan or LeBron James is another great example. There's one Michael Jordan, there's one LeBron James, there was one Kobe Bryant, if you're a sports fan. there aren't a bunch of those out there, right? Some of these figures transcend region, et cetera, and even sports because they're so popular and prevalent and they're so good at what they do. But you have to avoid this. You can't be perfect at everything. You can't be a GRC expert. You can't be a PR expert. You can't be a technology expert. You can't be an expert on strategy and vision. You can't coach, mentor, and be a role model. You just can't. Avoid this Vinci fallacy. Don't try to be every type. Because that's our criticism, right? Everyone says, well, you've got to be all those things if you're a CISO. And that's sort of true, but you can't be all of those things and be incredibly successful at each and every one of them unless you are mythical in stature. There's one of you, and I want to meet you. I think it'll be awesome to have a conversation with you, but it's not scalable. That's not the way that you can make an intentional journey throughout your career. So don't make the Da Vinci mistake. It's a huge problem. And you have to make sure that you avoid it because it will cost you and you'll wind up not being great at any of these. Sure, can you hire talent that's awesome at each one of these? You should. By the way, that's the most common CEO advice out there. Surround yourself with experts. But for CISOs, our advice is often, nope, you got to do all these things. Like, why are we telling a CISO that when we're telling a CEO who arguably has a much larger domain of responsibility, the opposite, that they don't need to do all this and they can't? Right? We're giving exactly opposite advice depending on which sort of aisle of the self-help bookstore you happen to be on, or I guess in this case, the self-help online bookstore. So in leaving, as we wrap things up, know your type. Types are not born, they're made. Of course, every type is needed at various times, just like transformational is prevalent now and necessary. Think about the things that energize you and what would you rather do all day? And also know your future type. Who are you now and who do you want to be next? What type? Again, skills, behaviors, competencies matter. Identify your gaps in knowledge, remediate them, and become the next type that you want, because there is no best. There's a best for you right now and a best for you then and a best for you in the future, but you don't have to be one or the other right now. You don't have to be the one you are today forever. If influence and becoming a transformational CISO is your goal, well, learn how to sell, read a book, take some classes, take public speaking classes, for example, right? Close up some of those gaps and softer skills out there and use all of that to maximize your success. As you think about opportunities in your career, as you're recruited, and you will be, CISOs are in demand like every other role, pick the right company based on your company fit and the CISO company fit. Make choices based on where you want to go and what you want to do. And remember that every role has some aspects, but don't get sidelined trying to be that ultimate polymath or wizard. If you're exceptional and a true sort of mythical, transcendent CISO, you can do it, but not everyone can. So you've got to make a few more intentional choices about your career. More than anything right now, look at that transformational CISO stuff that I went over. The empathy, the communication, the influence, the positivity, and try to bring that into what you're doing because that's what your teams need for you. And in doing so, you'll probably cultivate some skill sets and might actually find your next opportunity and your next type just based on that because you were required to do it versus trying to do it. That's it for me. I want to thank everyone for being here and having me on. Thank you so much. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. And I look forward to talking again in the future.